Why do SaaS startups fail? Multiple reasons why SaaS startups fail, but in this video, I'm going to run through the 5 top reasons I've seen SaaS startups fail. I'm Matt Grace, Managing Director of Flying Donkey. Let's get into it. Reason number 1 why SaaS startups fail. They don't solve a problem of value. In order for a business to actually exist, it has to solve something of value. And the reason for that is because your clients are going to pay you money to solve that problem. If you don't solve something of value, they're not going to give you any money to solve that problem. I know this may sound obvious, but when you're starting a SaaS product, make sure you're solving a problem that other people actually value. While it's always good to solve a problem that you know, maybe you don't value that or you're not going to pay money for it. So it's really key that you actually solve something of value. And this is the number 1 reason why I see startups fail. How do you get around this? Well, the first thing I recommend is using a minimum viable product. So what is a minimum viable product? What it is it's trying to get your product out to the market as quickly and cheaply as possible to see if there is value out in the market for that problem. A minimum viable product is really about delivering the smallest amount of functionality you can that solves some value that you can get in front of clients to start receiving feedback. Key trick that some people sometimes forget is, while you can be solving a problem, it might not be a problem that people value, and that means they won't pay you money for. A good example that I come across multiple times is the use of AI. AI can run across large data sets and produce really interesting charts and tables. The thing here is, taking that to market to crunch that data to produce a chart is not actually adding value. If you produce a pie chart or a graph or whatever the chart is to someone, and the chart looks pretty and great, that's fantastic. But that's actually not of value. What they really want is an actionable step off the back of that can then save them or make them more money. And this is really what needs to happen in your startup. You need to get that minimum viable product to market in front of a client and make sure it's something of value that they'll actually pay you money for. The other key thing that an MVP does is it makes sure that you're not developing unnecessary features. So once you've got this MVP in the market and you've got clients on it, you can then start asking them about what functionality and features that they want and at the same time that they will pay for. If you're working in isolation and building a product without it in the market, you may build products and features that are unnecessary for the clients or things that they don't value. And I see this all the time with SaaS startups. They want to have all these ideas and these products and functionality features in their product that they think are valuable to the client. But they build them and get them into the market, and unfortunately, they're not the things that the clients actually wanted. And that's why building that MVP and getting it into the market will stop you building these unnecessary features, which cost you both time and money. And finally, what this allows you to do is to get the feedback loop in place that I talk about. Now you've got the MVP in the market, and maybe you've just missed the mark on the value proposition. But if you've got that early and you've got cash left over, what you can start doing is talking to the clients that are on your platform and ask them what they will pay for. And then you can start doing this rapid idea generation where you can start deploying products on an ongoing basis and actually solving areas of value. You may need to pivot slightly on some of the original things you wanted to do, but because you're talking to the market and talking to the audience and they're giving you feedback on the products that you have, you'll be able to do this easily and cheaply. Again, what I see startups do is work in isolation or in a bubble, and they try and build all the features and functionality themselves and deliver it all as a lump at the end. There's no feedback from the market, there's no feedback from clients, and therefore once they get to market, they don't have that feedback loop. The feedback loop comes too late, they run out of cash, and they realize they weren't actually solving a thing of value. And that's really the end of this key point number 1, and that is make sure you solve something of value, and you can really find that out by building an MVP. All right, point number 2 as to why SaaS startups fail is they don't have enough cash reserves. Building a product and getting a product to market, supporting that product and making it into a profitable venture is an expensive undertaking. You need a lot of people with a lot of skills and a lot of money to do this. I get approached regularly for people wanting to start businesses, and they come to me and they say, Matt, how much will this business cost me to build? So I can throw out a number on how much a SaaS product is going to cost to build. I always say to them, that's not going to be the amount of money you need. Let's just say for argument's sake, it costs $20,000 to build a product for them. If they go and raise $20,000 to build that product, I know that business is going to fail. And the reason is because having a great product doesn't mean you're going to succeed as a SaaS startup. You're also going to need all the other things that make a business great. A sales team, a marketing team, an operations team, a support team, etc. You're also going to need outside help, accountants, lawyers, the list goes on and on. Simply having a product in isolation is not going to allow you to have a successful SaaS business. And this is what I say to people, if you're going to want to build, say, a $20,000 SaaS product, you need to raise about 5 times that, about 100,000. And that's not money that's going to come to, say, us as developers or even developers you hire internally. That other money is going to have to be cash flow in your business that you're going to need to do to actually run and make this business successful. Getting a business off the ground is really hard. Branding, sales, marketing, working out those channels that fit and make you profitable is a difficult undertaking. Having the consultants and people around you with expertise are expensive. Building a product is only one part of the equation. And while people think it's the most fun and important part of it, and it may be, it's also one of the parts that gets all the money in the initial phase, and therefore the SaaS startup fails. In my experience, I won't really build products unless people are funded in other areas, because the thing is, while I could build the best product for you, if you've got no sales or marketing strategy behind it, and you've got no operational support staff, I could build you the best piece of product in the world and it may not go anywhere. On the contrary, as I talk about, if you come to me and you try and build a small MVP, you've got some cash reserves and the sales and marketing thing in place, I can see that your business may actually go somewhere. And so it's really important to understand the cash reserves you need for a business are always going to be more than you think they are. Don't look at what it's going to cost to build the product, look what it's going to cost to build the business. And that includes from start to finish, sales, marketing, build, support, and operations. So how do you get cash flow for a startup? I'm going to first off by say it's hard. It's really hard. Actually, it's really, really hard. I know you probably see online where people raise $100 million for this or $100 million for that, but getting funding for a SaaS startup is really difficult. And honestly, there's really two ways that happen. One, obviously people go out and raise money in, say, a seed round, which then they sort of get on the whole raising roadmap from there. The other way they do it, which I think is more sustainable, is they start really small and they do a revenue-based model. So if we go back to the first instance, how that normally works is you have a product or an idea and you've got to go out to market to get some seed funding. Generally, this is done through friends and family, and you're getting a small amount of money to try and get something built, potentially MVP, some sales and marketing set up, and some other sort of support operations around you. The idea really here in this first stage of the seed round is to try and get some market fit, to get some clients on the platform and prove out that the idea has some value. Once you're getting some traction, you can then go rack and raise subsequent rounds after that. The real thing that people are going to be looking for here in those subsequent rounds is understanding from the small amount of money you've spent now, let's just say you spent 100,000, how much you're able to build, how many clients were you able to get on, and how much revenue have you been able to make out of those clients. So let's just say you built 100,000 and you've now got $5,000 in annual revenue. If they give you another 500,000, does that mean they can add another 25,000 on top of that in a recurring fashion? Well, it's really about stepping up those phases. Every time you're spending the money, that you're getting the revenue on the back end. So sometimes call this cash flow cliffs, because what happens is in these rounds, you're going to need to keep increasing your revenue and your market fit to raise the next round. Because if you raise one round and you go back again and you haven't got more market fit, you're going to really struggle to get more money. The thing though with raising money is you really want to get to a point where you don't have to raise any more and you become revenue self-sufficient. In the fact that the business builds enough revenue, then you can use those revenues and plow them back into the business. And this takes you to my second way to cash flow a business. Use some savings initially to try and get a very small MVP out to market and make sure you hit a very valuable proposition and you can start getting revenue in. Now this method is going to take slower, but it's going to be a better build for you. What I mean by this is, let's just say you start your product and in the first year, you've got to pour $20,000 into it. But in the first year, you might be able to get $5,000 of revenue back through the door. That should be a recurring revenue for you, which means you've got $5,000 for the next year, plus whatever you sell going forward. You're going to be going slower than the person who's able to raise the money, but the idea is you're building a self-sustaining cash flow positive business that you can then plow more and more money through. SaaS products are additive in the fact that they're recurring on an ongoing basis. That means if you make $5,000 in the first year, you will make $5,000 plus in the next year, and it becomes very additive. While it takes a number of years to build up a good solid cash flow, if you do it nice, slowly and steadily, you'll have a much better chance than some of the other people who dash in and spend all their cash and they crash out. So inherently, having not enough cash reserves is really something that can be avoided, but it's something I see very common and a lot of SaaS startups fail. I'd recommend you try and go for a revenue investment model, and that's trying to get something to market where the clients are paying you for your product and you're investing the cash that you get. Alternatively, if you are going to raise cash and seed money, make sure you raise plenty of money, not just for development, but also for the wider areas. All right, point number 3, using the wrong pricing structure. Using the wrong pricing structure is a very technical thing that I've seen sometimes issues. Using the wrong pricing structure is a very technical and smaller nuance that I have seen trip up some startups. Essentially what they're doing is undervaluing the service they're providing, or undervaluing the service they're providing in relation to how much it costs to deliver. There's really two key metrics that you want to watch here. One is lifetime value of a client and the cost of acquisition of that client. In simple terms, if your lifetime value of a client is greater than your cost to acquire, then you potentially have a profitable business. Now, there's a lot more detail we might go into later in another video, but realistically what you want to do here is price your business at a point where you're making enough money to both acquire them and support them and have some profit left over. And that's where the lifetime value comes in. Let's do a quick example. Lifetime value of a client. So let's say you're charging them $10 per month for your services, and generally speaking, your clients last for 5 years on your platform. You'll have to do some discounting of cash flows here, but for a simple example, let's not do that. Let's just say it's $10 per month over those 5 years. It's going to be $120 per year or $600 for the 5 years. Now, if the cost to acquire that client is say $700, then essentially you have the wrong price business. Because the problem there is you're going to have to spend $700 to acquire that client, and then spend 5 years to actually claw that back. And even after that, you're not going to have all the money that that client has taken from you. What you really need to have is a business that say produces $100 a month and still costs $700 to acquire. Therefore, that lifetime value of a client is going to go from $600 to $6,000, And therefore acquiring that client at $700 means that over the life of that client, you're going to make $5,300 in gross profit. It's really important you work out how much it costs to acquire a client and how much it costs to service those clients. And in SaaS businesses, that's hopefully very little. And realistically, what you want to make sure is that that lifetime value of a client is significantly more than it costs to acquire. And obviously, because you've got these two metrics, there's two things you can do here. One, you can add more value and make the clients pay more. This is one way to do it, and that's by adding more features and more functionality to the platform and increasing the value to a client, and then going back and asking them to pay more for that. That will increase the lifetime value of the client as long as they stay on the platform for the same period of time. At the same time, you may want to try and reduce your cost of acquisition. Maybe the channel you're using isn't the most efficient way to find clients. For example, you might be using a Google Ads or Facebook strategy, and that might be quite expensive. Maybe you should be doing cold calling or conferences, and maybe that's cheaper overall to find your clients. Both sides of these equations become really important to make sure you get a right mix of how to price your software and how much it's going to make you in the long term. Pricing to me seems to be a bit of an afterthought for a lot of these businesses, and that's why some of these businesses don't have the revenue to sustain themselves. I talked previously about cash flow, and this is really where the cash flow comes in. If you're a revenue and you aren't pulling enough revenue in based on how much it costs, if you're in business and you're not charging enough money to these clients that covers the cost of acquisition, then you're going to go out of business very quickly. One way to really accelerate your growth is if your value proposition is far higher than your cost of acquisition. And let's just say you're able to cover your cost of acquisition in 30 or 60 days, it means you can take that money and replow it back in and grow at almost an exponential rate. So while pricing is probably an afterthought, it's one of those things I've seen trip up some startups because essentially they're pricing too low for the value they have. And at the same time, you can price too high. So make sure you look at your pricing model and how it's based against your value and you get that right. But the fourth reason I see startups fail is having the wrong team. This can really happen in any business, but realistically, when you're starting a new business, it's key to have the right people in the right positions. Building a business is not easy. You're going to need people with wide-ranging experience and backgrounds, and also people who are going to jump in and do a bunch of work. In my experience, you're really going to need three key people. That is one person to go out and do the sales and marketing, and that is get clients in the door. You're going to need a second person who's going to be able to deliver those services to those clients, essentially keeping those promises. And the third person, you're going to need someone who's managing operations. That's paying people and getting things out on time. Sometimes I find businesses where they're either heavily weighted in one or the other categories, or they have all the people without the experience in those three areas. Probably the most common one I see is where everyone is either a salesperson or in delivery. So let's just run through an example of that. When I run into people who have startups, they might come from a sales background. So it might be three guys who've got together and they're all salespeople. That's fantastic. They can go out and they're able to sell clients and they're able to get clients keen on what the product they're going to do. The problem they have is in actually delivering that product and actually getting that to market and running a business. On the other hand, I've seen people who come from the back office of businesses who've run really successful operations and they can't sell the product. So when you're building a SaaS startup, it's make sure that you put together a complementary team of people. Some salespeople, some operations people, and make sure they're equally ready to jump in and help the other with their job. Having too much weight in one area will mean you don't have enough people in other areas. Now there is ways to solve this, and obviously you can bring people in to fill gaps. Obviously here at Flying Donkey, we help on that delivery aspect of SaaS platforms, where you may have a tech team or a tech founder who simply just can't get across enough of the detail or deliver fast enough for your salespeople to go. That's one of the key things that we help startups with, and make sure they can get that product to market and deliver it. Generally speaking, when we come in, they'll have a strong sales process and a strong marketing process, and they're getting a lot of clients across the line, but they can't deliver on those promises. We come in the door and make sure those promises are delivered, and that really helps accelerate their business because they can charge their clients more and they get that revenue through the door. If you can't do the sales and marketing strategy, then it's really key to fill that gap. Again, you can fill it with a sales or marketing company or a person internally, but the idea is you need to make sure that you're getting customers through the door and you have that correct proposition. Again, I've seen SaaS startups fail here because they go too heavy or too light in one of these areas and they don't have the right mix and team. Running a business is a challenging undertaking and you really need a broad set of skills in order to achieve a successful business. All right, my fifth and final thing that I've seen where startups fail is about being outcompeted. Now, I had a look at the stats on this one and it reckons about 1 in 5 businesses report this as a reason they fail. And it's probably one of the ones that don't get mentioned as much. And that's obviously because essentially you've gone into war and you've been defeated and you've come back and you haven't been able to make a better product than your competitors. You've got to remember in business that you're competing against other businesses for people's money. When you're a consumer, you've got many options you want to go for. And you might be building a SaaS product in a niche that's got multiple competitors. You've got to make sure that your proposition lines up, both in a value proposition and also in a delivery proposition, and makes it compelling for a user to get on board. One example I want to bring up here is Uber. Now, while Uber has been seen as a bit of a poster child of the ride-sharing community, Uber has really been struggling over its years to really make any money. And while it's a bit of an outlier in the amount of money it's been able to get, Uber has found that it has a huge amount of copycats that's now followed it. The problem here is that Uber didn't really outcompete its clients. It got there first, but what it offered was really nothing more than the copycats could do. You've probably seen loads more ride-sharing apps enter the market, and they made it a much more difficult place. The issue here is now Uber is so large and has such a high cost base that where they're going to make their money, they lose it all in expenses through their businesses. So to me, essentially what's happening is Uber is being outcompeted by these more nimble and cheaper competitors, and they're able to run their businesses because they're a lot leaner and came in after the fact. Uber did a lot of the heavy lifting, getting those ride sharing in and getting those legislations changed to allow it, and that's cost them a lot of money. But unfortunately, that first mover advantage is something they haven't been able to capitalize on. And now they're getting outcompeted and left, right, and center, with even cabs and taxis coming back into the fray. It's very important that you keep track of where you are in the marketplace and what your competitors are doing. That is, what features are they delivering, what price point are they doing, and how the consumers are looking at your business in comparison to others. Being outcompeted is generally something that doesn't happen overnight. It's generally a sort of death by 1,000 cuts, where a competitor may be there one day and then they're slowly building up, and they might be just adding features over time. You're doing the same thing, but you might be going in a different direction. You might not be adding the value that they are. You might have a slow burn and churn rate where people are slowly moving off your platform, and you don't really realize unless you're tracking the numbers. So it's really key that you watch where your proposition is in the market, and you make sure the value you're providing to the market is key and enough from what you're charging. What you don't want to do is realize one day that all your clients have left to competitors, and you've got no business left. I hope these 5 tips have helped you understand how SaaS startups have failed, and I've tried to give you some reasons why to avoid these failures. If you're trying to build a SaaS startup and you've got some issues in your business you want to discuss, or you need some help delivering your SaaS product to market, feel free to reach out and I'm happy to have a chat.